I couldn't agree more with you. I think the war in Ukraine really exposed the dark side of US foreign policy in terms of waging wars via proxies. And while the war in Ukraine is not the first proxy war that the United States has directly funded, it's not the first and maybe not the last. Hopefully it's the last one, but it's probably not. But at least I think it's definitely brought to the surface the human cost of not only corruption in Ukraine that allowed this to take place, but also the U.S. foreign policy in terms of its interventionist and very aggressive nature and how that
Well, people know
affects.
the tactics now, right? So people
Right.
now know the tactics. It's there for everyone to see.
Yep.
And look, before social media, it wasn't as well known, obviously, but it is undeniable now that the United States has a certain playbook that it
Hmm.
uses in different societies. And we saw that play out in Maidan, etc., and ongoing, right, all the way through. The playbook is actually not a complicated one. And the reason it's not complicated is because it worked. Never forget that it worked. The playbook worked for decades after the Second World War, whether it was in Latin America or in Europe or right across Asia as well. It worked. It caused divisions. It exploited divisions. It enabled the United States to keep parties at war with each other, so as to, create opportunities for the United States, whether they were economic opportunities or ones in which they could just leverage, one side against the other. So the playbook worked, but the playbook is now obvious to everyone. And once you know what the playbook is, you can start to see how you are the victim of the playbook yourself. And I think that that realization is starting to dawn on more and more people, particularly on Taiwan Island, that they have been used for a long time. I get that there are some people who are, passionate and ideologically committed to, independence and all of that. But the truth is that most people aren't, right? And
Hmm.
and most people are either ambivalent and just want life to go on, understandably, just let me get on with my life. Others, want to see a resolution. And the need to resolve this issue, I think, is getting more urgent. And I don't mean tomorrow, as you said, it could take 20 years. But it has reached a point where the understanding of how this playbook is mobilized to create these divisions and to cause trouble for people means that more people are saying actually we don't want to get used. Yes, there has been a long-standing conflict, right? But this conflict is actually not in anybody's long-term interest, and we must find a way of bedding it down, solving it. And now we know that opening up those discussions is always difficult, right? Because there's bad blood, there's, built-in hostilities, there's all this animosity that has been whipped up over many decades, and people take positions, right? And so letting go of your position is is difficult because it could lose face and reputations. But the reality is, the nobody wants to get used, and especially used to fight someone else's war. Nobody wants to die for the Americans, and so I think that we're starting to see it too. So
Hmm.
the KMT, the long-standing party of government of the Republic of China, of course, until recent times. Their deputy chairman was in China just last week, engaged at a think tank level. And the new chairwoman of the KMT is actually talking about needing to re-engage with the mainland. She actually says explicitly that she's we're all Taiwanese and we're also Chinese. This is a shocking proposition to the independent forces because they've spent 25 years trying to dissociate themselves from being Chinese. And so, this idea of Taiwanese identity, which, many people and you'll be familiar with this because this is exactly the kind of playbook that was rolled out in Ukraine as well, right? Exactly the same playbook. Dissociate the heritage. We
Mhm.
are our own identities. We've got no relationship with something else, which of course is very difficult because, I'll give you an example. Recently, there's been a work of art, which is a beautiful jade carving of a green cabbage, actually, right? And it comes from the National Museum in Taipei, and it's been traveling the world, and it's just been returned back to Taipei. And of course, Taipei is very proud of it. It talks about this amazing treasure, being shown to the world. What they don't tell you is that that treasure came from the imperial court in Qing dynasty, Beijing. And that's where it came from. That's the link, of course, to the Chinese heritage. And so these are the contradictions that, of course, exist when you want to claim these centuries and millennia of heritage, and yet at the same time you want to disavow them. And this is why it's falling apart. You just simply can't sustain that position. The more people I speak to on the island today of varying age groups, the more they actually realize that push come to shove, they're Chinese. Right? And this is actually a very important, in a sense, collapse of the attempt to cultivate an alternative identity. Um, and it's not to say that they see themselves as Chinese in exactly the same way that someone from some other province in China does. And in fact, there's so much diversity across China itself that people see themselves also as being provincial, right? So Southerners and Northerners actually have a different sensibility about lots of things, just as, folk on Taiwan Island will as well. But increasingly, this realization that they have a depth of heritage that they can draw on that actually makes them what they are, thousands of years. That is actually reasserting itself. Now, you can't wipe that sort of stuff out easily. 25 years, 30 years, you can't wipe it out. And so it's coming back, and it's creating this cultural impetus to reopen up this cross-straits question. How do we resolve this? Is the question that people are asking. No longer is it well, we want to dissociate ourselves. The question is how do we again become whole, whilst recognizing the passage of time and what that passage of time has implied? That's the question that Chinese people on both sides of the straits will necessarily address over the next, as I said, it could be 5 years, it could be 20 years, but it will be addressed. But it won't be addressed as an American bargaining chip.